She looked him dead in the eyes. "You sold me," she whispered. Javier's heart stopped. The girl he risked everything to protect now thought he betrayed her. But what if the forms she saw were forged? What if the real villain wasn't him, but someone from his past? Stay with us until the end, because this isn't just a story about genius. It's a battle for justice. Subscribe and uncover the truth. The rain came down in relentless sheets, slicing through the wind and pounding against the pavement like nature itself was hammering the city into submission. Downtown Chicago blurred into a wash of silver and gray, car headlights reflecting off puddles and windows misted with condensation. Above the courthouse steps, the American flag clung to its pole, soaked and limp, barely fluttering in the breeze. Javier Cortez stood motionless at the top of those stairs. His suit, once custom-tailored and sharp, now hung on his body like dead weight. The navy fabric was soaked through, plastered to his chest, sleeves dripping onto the marble beneath his feet. His hands, bare and trembling slightly, held no umbrella, no phone, no briefcase, just silence. A few people passed by. Some glanced at him, others didn't. No one stopped. 2 years ago, they would have stopped. Back when Javier was a name that held weight. Back when he graced the covers of Fast Company and MIT Tech Review, called the Cuban Edison of neural computation. The man who turned predictive AI into a movement. The man who stood on TED stages and promised technology would make the world more ethical, not just faster. Now, he was a ghost with skin. Behind him, the courthouse doors groaned shut. The words of his attorney still echoed in his mind like they'd been spoken with a gun to his temple. Final appeal denied. That was the last chance. Javier, they're not giving Signum back. The patents, the data, your equity, all gone. Javier hadn't spoken a word since. He couldn't. Something in his throat, shame, probably, had turned to stone. His lawyer had walked off without waiting for a goodbye, taking the last of Javier's legal folders in a sleek black briefcase that, until last month, used to be his. Javier didn't move. The rain did the talking now. He turned slowly, descending the courthouse steps one at a time, each footfall heavy. The wind picked up, flapping his soaked dress shirt through the ripped lapel of his blazer. At the corner, a paper cup blew past his feet. He stepped over it. No destination, no plan, just one thought repeating in his mind like a glitch in bad code. I built something beautiful, and they destroyed it. By the time he reached the alley beside Halsted Street, the noise of the city, honking brakes, sirens, melted into a dull ache in his ears. He paused under the overhang of an old storefront, where rain leaked through cracks in the metal siding. His stomach growled. It had been almost a day since he last ate. He considered heading back to the shelter, the St. Jude Transitional Center. Clean beds, hot food, and a room full of other broken men who pretended they weren't listening when he coughed himself to sleep. But even there, the shame followed him like a second skin. It wasn't just the bankruptcy. It wasn't just losing his company. It was a realization that in every room where his name used to open doors, people now only saw headlines. Disgraced tech founder faces ethics scandal after secret data sale. From billion-dollar brain to burnout, the rise and fall of Javier Cortez. He didn't even contest it anymore. He was halfway through lighting a cigarette with trembling fingers when the match fizzled out from rain. He didn't try again. Instead, he leaned back against the brick wall, eyes closed, letting the cold soak into him, letting it punish him. That's when he heard it, a faint scraping. Chalk, maybe? But who the hell used chalk in the rain? Javier turned his head and squinted down the alley. That's when he saw her, maybe 9, 10 years old, kneeling on the wet concrete under a rusted-out awning, hunched like a monk over an altar. She wore a hoodie 2 sizes too big, no shoes, and in her hand, a piece of blue sidewalk chalk, dancing across the soaked pavement with alarming speed. At first, he assumed she was doodling. Maybe hopscotch grids, maybe random drawings like kids always did. But then he moved closer and froze. Symbols, numbers, lines of logic, brackets, integrals, negative matrices, derivatives. It wasn't graffiti. It was math. not just arithmetic or long division. He recognized sequences from advanced calculus, partial derivatives, multivariable optimization notations, linear algebra diagrams sketched like muscle memory. The kind of work that didn't even appear until junior year at MIT. For a second, Javier wondered if it was copied. But no. He watched her pause, glance at a miswritten sign, erase it, and correct it. She was solving, not memorizing. Like the rain didn't exist. Like the world didn't either. He took a step closer. The girl didn't look up. "You shouldn't be out here," he said, softly. She kept writing. A faint twitch at the corner of her mouth was the only sign she heard him. He crouched. "You know what you're doing there?" Now she paused, looked up for the first time. Eyes sharp, not angry, not scared, just ancient. "It helps me think," she said. Her voice was soft, controlled. "What's your name?" She didn't answer. "I'm not here to bother you. I'm just trying to understand." Silence. Then Imani. The name landed in his chest like a whisper he'd heard before in a dream. "I'm Javier," he said. She looked down again. "Okay. Are you in school?" She didn't answer. He noticed her feet again. Bare, bleeding from the heels. Small stones embedded in the skin. His throat tightened. "Do you have somewhere to go?" No. It was the way she said it. Not like it hurt. Not like it mattered. Just a fact. He stood slowly. The chalk was nearly melted in her hand now, leaving trails of pigment on her fingers. People passed on the far end of the street, umbrellas tilted, eyes low. No one looked at them. Javier looked back down at her and asked, "Can I bring you something to eat?" She didn't answer. "Coffee." Nothing. He turned to go. As he stepped away, she said, almost absently, "Most people just call me weird. You didn't." He turned back, met her eyes. "You're not weird. You're rare." She blinked slowly. "Whatever." And just like that, she returned to her equations. In the rain, barefoot, brilliant, alone. Javier watched her for a long minute. Something had shifted in him, and he didn't know what, but he knew this much. She wasn't supposed to be here, and maybe neither was he. The next morning, the rain had slowed, but the cold hadn't. Wind curled through the streets of Chicago like it had teeth, biting into anyone foolish enough to stand still too long. Javier was already waiting when the first gray light broke through the clouds, standing on the same corner near the alley where he had seen her. He had two things in his hands: a small paper bag with a ham and egg sandwich from a 24-hour diner, and a cheap gas station coffee, still steaming. The coffee wasn't good, he knew that, but it was hot, and it was something. He didn't know if she'd come back, but part of him, a part he'd almost forgotten existed, hoped she would. She did. Imani appeared like a shadow slipping through cracks of the city, emerging from behind a dumpster with a plastic grocery bag slung over her shoulder like it held her entire world. She was chewing something, crackers, maybe. Crumbs dusted the side of her mouth. Her hoodie looked even more worn today. She had wrapped plastic bags around her feet, like makeshift shoes, but one had already torn. She saw him, didn't smile, didn't flinch, just blinked slowly, like, "Of course you're still here." Javier raised the bag in his hand. "Brought you something." Imani didn't move. "It's just a sandwich. And coffee. You don't have to take it." She stepped forward anyway, cautiously, like a stray animal testing the distance. She took the sandwich, sniffed it once, then unwrapped it without a word and took a bite. Her expression didn't change, but she kept eating. He offered her the coffee. She smelled it, took a slow sip, then said flatly, "It's not poisoned." Javier chuckled. "You sound disappointed." Imani looked up at him, eyes unreadable. "You're not very good at lying." He grinned, a little embarrassed. "I used to be, not anymore." They stood in silence for a moment, surrounded by the hollow sound of passing cars and far-off sirens. Imani sat on the curb, legs crossed, sandwich in one hand, coffee in the other. Javier sat a few feet away, not too close, not too far. She didn't talk much, but she didn't leave either. That was enough. Over the next few days, This became a routine. Javier would show up with coffee and something warm to eat, cheap breakfast burritos, a muffin, once even a slice of leftover pizza. Imani would always take it, never thanked him, never asked for more, but she always showed up, and every time she had a piece of chalk in her pocket. Javier watched her draw on the pavement, sometimes equations, sometimes odd geometric patterns, sometimes things that looked like machines he didn't recognize. Once, she wrote something in what looked like Latin. He asked her what it meant. She shrugged. Stuff I read. Where do you read Latin? Abandoned library on Jefferson. Upstairs section isn't locked. She said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Javier found himself studying her more than the equations. The way she tilted her head when a line didn't make sense. How she mouthed the variables under her breath. How she rubbed her left wrist when she got frustrated. There was rhythm in her thoughts. Almost like she was listening to a song no one else could hear. He didn't press. He didn't pry. He just showed up one evening, just after sunset. They sat together on the steps of a boarded-up laundromat. The wind had picked up again. Javier took off his jacket and put it over her shoulders. She didn't argue. After a long silence, she said, "You ask fewer questions than most people. Is that a good thing? It's a not annoying thing." He smiled. "I'll take that as a compliment." She stared at the sky. "Why do you keep coming back?" He thought about lying, about saying something simple or easy, but he didn't. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Maybe because I see something in you." Imani turned her head slowly. "Like what?" "Like, you remind me of someone I used to be. Before I screwed it all up." She didn't say anything right away. Then, softly, "They laughed at you too?" Javier froze. That wasn't just a question. That was a knife drawn from memory. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, they did." Imani pulled her knees into her chest, resting her chin on them. "People don't like when you know stuff. It makes them uncomfortable." "I know. They say you're weird, crazy, broken. They said all that to me, too." A beat passed between them. Something unspoken, something fragile. Imani looked at him. For the first time, not with guarded suspicion, but with something close to recognition. Like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't completely alone in the world after all. Later that night, Javier lay on his cot at the shelter, staring at the ceiling while the radiator hissed, and the man across from him snored like a busted lawnmower. He couldn't stop thinking about her, about the way she moved, the way she thought, the way she saw the world like it was a puzzle she could fix, if only people would get out of the way. He couldn't shake the feeling that if he didn't do something, if he didn't protect her, someone else would find her first. And not all hands that reach out are kind. The next morning, he called social services from a payphone on Clark Street. "I want to apply for foster guardianship," he said. The voice on the other end paused. "Do you currently have employment, sir?" "No." "Stable housing?" "Technically, I'm in transition." There was a longer pause. "Mental health history?" He hesitated. "I've had some episodes, but I'm not unstable." A faint, almost patronizing laugh from the other end. "Sir, this process requires financial stability, legal residence, background checks, and psychological screening. Are you certain?" "I'm certain," he interrupted. "She's not just some kid. He trailed off, searching for words. "She's different. You'd understand if you saw her." There was no reply. "Please," he added quietly. But the voice simply said, "I'm sorry, sir. You need to be realistic." Javier hung up slowly, hand trembling. Realistic. That word had become a prison. That afternoon, he sat beside Imani again. She was scribbling something that looked like code written backwards. "You ever wonder if they're all wrong?" he asked. She didn't look up. "No, I know they are." And for the first time in a long time, Javier believed it too. The fourth morning, she didn't come. Javier waited. He stood in the same spot by the alley, coffee in hand, paper bag clutched tight like some kind of ritual would summon her back. But the cracked sidewalk remained empty. The broken awning above the alley buzzed faintly with flickering light, casting little shadows that moved with the wind. No chalk marks. No girl. Just rainwater pooling where brilliance had once lived the day before. He told himself she'd just gone somewhere else. Maybe she found a safer place to sleep. Maybe someone helped her. He knew better. Help rarely found girls like her. It wasn't until the third day of her absence that he caught sight of her again, curled up behind a dumpster near an old community center. She wasn't drawing this time. She was just sitting there, her hoodie wrapped tight around her knees, face down, eyes empty, like someone had pressed pause on her existence. Javier approached carefully. "They're gonna take me," she said before he even opened his mouth. His heart stopped. "Who told you that?" "I heard the staff talking. Shelter people. They said someone called about me." Her voice was flat. "That I'm not supposed to be alone." He crouched next to her. "I never gave anyone your name. You never even told me your last name." "They don't need it," she said, eyes still distant. "They just need to know I don't belong to anyone." She looked up at him then, and in her expression was something terrifying for a child to carry. Certainty. Not fear, not confusion. Certainty. Javier wanted to say something comforting, that he'd protect her, that no one could take her without her say-so. But he remembered how easy it had been for the system to erase his own name from the company he built. A few signatures, a false accusation, a silent courtroom. He remembered how quickly belief turned into suspicion when the wrong people told the right lie. He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away, but she didn't squeeze back either. "I'm not going to let them," he said. Imani blinked. "You don't get to choose." He stared at her, studying the faint purple bruises under her eyes, the way her body had shrunk tighter since the last time they spoke. It wasn't just fear. She was preparing to disappear. That night, he stayed up searching through forums, legal aid, housing rights, foster advocacy, underground education programs. Everyone had rules. Everyone had procedures. And none of them applied to people like him, or girls like Imani. The next day, she came back to the sidewalk. She had chalk again. But this time, Javier didn't just watch. He pulled out a notebook and began writing down what she drew. Her sequences were dizzying. Number chains folding in on themselves. Logic puzzles overlaid with geometry. There were patterns, sure, but not the kind you could Google. These weren't homework problems. This was independent thought. Discovery. She wasn't solving someone else's work. She was making her own. "Where did you learn this?" he asked. "I didn't," she said. "I just see it." "Like in your head?" "Not always. Sometimes it's more like noise that gets quiet when I write it down." Javier felt a chill crawl up his spine. "You ever show this to anyone?" She shrugged. "People don't look, or they laugh. One guy said I was faking. Said girls like me don't do math." Javier's jaw clenched. "What guy?" She shrugged again. But the word stuck with him. Girls like me. He knew what that meant. He knew what she meant. The way people saw her. A young black girl, barefoot, hoodie stained, no paperwork, no school ID. They didn't see a prodigy. They saw a statistic. A problem. A question no one wanted to solve. That night, as he walked back toward the shelter, a new thought followed him like a shadow. If she were white, if she were rich, if she were anyone else, would she already be in some fancy STEM academy right now? Being celebrated instead of hidden? Probably. And that burned. The next morning, he brought a camera. Not a fancy one, just a beat-up old Canon he borrowed from a friend at the shelter. He asked Imani if he could record her working. She didn't answer at first, just stared at the camera, like it was a trap. But eventually she nodded. Barely. He didn't post it right away. He recorded for 3 days straight, collecting footage, her solving problems, her muttering through theories, her talking to herself in code. Then, after reviewing the clips, he selected a 2-minute segment, her walking through a recursive logic pattern using only sidewalk chalk and a milk crate as a whiteboard. He uploaded it anonymously. No name, no face, just, who can solve this problem? Within 12 hours, the video was on fire. Reddit exploded. A few math nerds argued about the logic steps. One guy from a math forum said it looked like something built on top of Feynman's work, but untrained. Another asked if it was AI generated. Someone else said it had to be a hoax. But one comment stood out. It came from a verified university account. If this was created by a child, then we're looking at something we haven't seen in decades. Possibly ever. Please, DM. Javier's heart raced. He didn't know what he was doing yet, but he knew one thing. She was real, and now someone else knew it too. But deep down, he also knew what came next wouldn't be fair. He had watched the world long enough to understand that when it finally noticed someone like Imani, it didn't always embrace them. Sometimes it tried to control them, or worse, erase them. He looked back through the footage, at the chalk-covered pavement, at the way Imani's eyes flickered when she solved something, at how her fingers moved faster than her thoughts, like the ideas were pouring through her. She wasn't just gifted, she was dangerous to the right people. And Javier? He was starting to realize this wasn't just about protecting her anymore. This was war. A quiet one, sure, but it had already begun. And Imani? She was its spark. For the first time in months, Javier woke up with purpose. He still slept in a cot at St. Jude's transitional shelter, wedged between two men who snored like broken engines, and another who talked in his sleep about baseball trades that probably never happened. But that morning, when the ceiling above him turned from black to a dull morning gray, he didn't lie there wondering how to get through the day. He didn't spiral. He just got up, dressed, and walked. The coffee was weak. The egg sandwich was already cold, but he brought both anyway. Imani was there, already on the sidewalk, chalk in hand, as if she'd never left. The soles of her feet were wrapped in duct tape now. Better than plastic bags, he figured. Resourceful. She didn't look up when he arrived, didn't pause, didn't greet him, just scribbled faster. He didn't interrupt. He just set the food beside her and sat cross-legged a few feet away, watching. She was halfway through building what looked like a nested equation, maybe a theory set inside itself like a logic fractal. He couldn't keep up with most of it, not anymore. He used to be able to, back when Signum was still his. Back when he gave talks about ethics and neural modeling and sleep cycles meant nothing to him. That brain still lived in him somewhere. But Imani, she was something else. There was no notebook, no calculator, no degree. But what she had was so much more terrifying than credentials, raw clarity, the kind that made even grown men afraid. She wasn't chasing an answer. She was extracting it, like it was already there, in the concrete or in her skull, and she just had to listen long enough to pull it out. When she finished, she sat back on her heels and exhaled slowly. He waited a moment, then asked, "What's it do?" She looked over at him, face calm. It measures broken patterns. Patterns in what? In people, in systems. It's like a way to see when something's lying. He blinked. "You made an algorithm that detects corruption?" She shrugged, like it was obvious. That's what all this is. Everyone's trying to pretend numbers don't lie, but numbers are the only ones that don't. He stared at her. His brain was catching up, slowly, and then it hit him. You could model systemic bias with this, couldn't you? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The chalk spoke for her. That night, he sat in the far corner of the shelter's common room, lights low, headphones in, reviewing every clip he had of her. He edited them carefully, building a small portfolio, a series of timestamps showing her solving abstract math, writing theories on folding data, even casually explaining entropy with the calm tone of someone describing the weather. He uploaded them to a private Google Drive folder. Then came the second step. He filled out the first draft of a guardianship petition. It was a long shot. He had no home address, no job history for the past 6 months. His name, though recently cleared of any criminal activity, still pinged red on corporate background checks. He was a man nobody believed anymore. But still, he tried. On the part that asked for a reason for requesting guardianship, he wrote 5 words, "Because no one else will." He hit save, but he didn't submit it. Not yet. The next morning, he brought Imani a new hoodie, one that actually fit. Not brand new, but clean, gray with deep pockets. He handed it to her wordlessly, not wanting to make a thing. But she just held it in her lap, staring at it for a long time. Finally, she said, "Why do you care?" The question knocked the wind out of him. Not because it was rude, because she meant it. Like the idea of being cared for was so foreign, she didn't trust it. He took a deep breath. "Because you remind me of what I forgot I was," he said. "And because I think the world has a bad habit of overlooking people who matter." She didn't respond. She just put the hoodie on. It fit perfectly. Later that day, they sat on the stoop of an abandoned discount furniture store. She was writing in a tattered notebook now, her own, filled with coded diagrams, schematic sketches, margin notes in at least 3 languages. He leaned over once to glance at a page. She didn't stop him, but she didn't explain either. "What are you working on?" "A folding structure." "For what?" "If you can bend space in the right way," she said, "you can make systems collapse on themselves." His eyes narrowed. "What kind of systems?" She finally looked at him. "The kind that keep people like me out." That night, something shifted in Javier. Not a breakdown, not fear. It was deeper, a reckoning, like his soul remembered something it had tried to forget. The next morning, he walked straight into the downtown office of Family and Child Services. The woman behind the desk was in her 40s. Thin smile, polished nails tapping on the keyboard. Name tag, caseworker Maria Dorn. He placed a form on her desk. "I want to adopt a minor," he said. She skimmed the document. Her smile tightened. "You're unemployed," she said. "Yes." "Living in temporary housing?" "Yes." "You were part of an ethics scandal." "It was civil. No charges. No convictions." She looked up. "Sir, this doesn't make sense." "I'm not asking for sense," Javier said. "I'm asking for a chance." She leaned back, arms crossed. "You understand how this looks, right?" He nodded. "You're a man with no current income, no legal stability. Try and take in a girl who has no record, no school enrollment, and no family on file." It sounded like a headline. Or worse, a setup. Her words stung, but he didn't flinch. "Maybe it is a headline," he said, "but it's a true one." Maria sighed. "You'd need a character reference. A stable address. A signed affidavit from a third party. Psychological evaluation." He nodded again. "I'll get them." "And even if you do," she added, "you should be prepared for rejection." He stood up. I already was. Outside, the city felt louder than usual, like it was mocking him. But when he turned the corner, there she was, Imani, sitting on the edge of the sidewalk with her chalk, drawing another pattern that didn't belong to any curriculum Javier had ever seen. He walked up slowly. She didn't turn around. "They said no, right?" she asked. "Yeah." She shrugged. "They always say no." He sat beside her. "But I'm not stopping." She didn't answer, not with words. But a few moments later, she handed him her chalk, and that, Javier thought, was the closest thing to trust he'd been given in a long, long time. Javier didn't sleep that night. Not really. He closed his eyes a few times. His body stopped moving, but his mind spun like an engine left running with no brakes. He thought about Imani's patterns, her algorithms, her hands moving over concrete like it was a whiteboard only she could see. He thought about the woman at Family and Child Services and the way her voice hardened when she mentioned protocol. He thought about what it meant to care about someone who the world didn't even see as real yet. And most of all, he thought about the people who would show up once they did see her. Because they would. He knew how it worked. He'd lived it. He'd once been the golden boy of predictive tech. The immigrant genius the tech world paraded around when it needed a success story. They only loved your brain until they couldn't control it anymore. Then they found ways to bury it. So before the sun even rose, he started his counterattack. He uploaded another video. This one was shorter, cleaner. A straight cut of Imani walking through a complex logic sequence. One of the ones he couldn't follow, but had cross-referenced with a university-level textbook just to confirm she wasn't making it up. She wasn't. He added subtitles. Simplified annotations. A voiceover that simply said, "This isn't fake. This is real." And if she had a last name, she'd be enrolled at MIT already. He didn't use her face. Didn't say her name. Didn't say his either. He posted it to Reddit, math communities, hacker threads, then, on a whim, dropped into a comment thread under a viral post titled, "What's the smartest thing you've ever seen a kid do?" Within 4 hours, the video hit 10,000 views. Within 12, 100,000. Most of the comments were shock, praise, disbelief. A few called it a stunt, AI generated, staged, but one stood out. It came from a handle tied to a Midwestern university. Verified. Simple. If this is legit, I want to talk. The next one came from a former NASA mathematician, then a cognitive development researcher. By nightfall, Javier's inbox was full of people asking questions he'd been asking for weeks. Who is she? Where does she study? How did she learn this? He didn't answer any of them. Instead, he printed out a stack of the comments, proof. And the next morning, he walked into the admissions office of 5 schools. The first school receptionist didn't even look up when he introduced himself. "Do you have legal guardianship over the minor in question?" "No," he said. "Then we can't process any academic testing without consent. But..." Next. Second school, same answer. Third one actually let him speak to an assistant dean, who glanced at the printouts, nodded slowly, then asked, "Is there a custody file on record?" "No." "Parental consent?" "She has no parents. We still need documentation." He left before he got angry. At the fourth school, a security guard politely asked him to leave when he raised his voice at the admissions officer. The fifth school wasn't much better, but he left a folder on the desk anyway. That night, he didn't go back to the shelter right away. He sat on the edge of a crumbling fountain downtown, watching people walk past him in coats and scarves and earbuds, not even noticing they were stepping over a storm. He looked at his phone, checked the video again. It had been re-uploaded to Twitter. A few bloggers were talking about it now. A few skeptics. A few trolls. He sighed and tucked it away. She was more than viral bait, more than clickbait genius. She was real, and still no one saw her. When he found Imani the next morning, she was sitting in front of a chain-link fence, twirling an empty marker between her fingers. The chalk had finally run out. He sat next to her. "They're not listening," he said. She didn't answer. "I brought all your equations. I showed them. I tried." "Didn't work, huh?" she murmured. "Nope." "Told you." There was no bitterness in her voice. No anger. Just a tired resignation. Like she'd already rehearsed this outcome 1,000 times in her head. "They only believe things when the right people say them," she added. "Yeah. People like me aren't the right people." He wanted to argue, wanted to tell her she was wrong. But he couldn't, because she wasn't. Instead, he asked, "If they did believe you, what would you do?" She turned toward him slowly. Her eyes were glassy but clear. "I'd break their system." Break it? Not to hurt them. Just so they'd stop pretending it's fair. Javier felt something twist in his chest. "You ever get scared?" She looked away. "I used to." He didn't press. That night, he reached out to someone he hadn't spoken to in 2 years. Jules Tran, a former data analyst at Signuum. One of the few people who'd left the company before the scandal broke. And even fewer who left with her integrity intact. They met in a cafe in Logan Square, both wearing their old identities like coats they were trying to grow back into. He explained everything. Jules didn't interrupt, didn't laugh. She just listened. And when he was done, she said, "You know what you have here, right?" He shook his head. "That's the problem." "I don't." "You have a black girl genius with no paperwork and no advocates. That makes her invisible to the system, which means no one knows how to handle her. Best case, they ignore her. Worst case, they try to own her." He swallowed hard. Jules leaned forward. "You need to be careful. Javi, you're not just fighting for her. You're fighting against something big. Bureaucracies, institutions, investors, people who see minds like hers as property, not people." "I'm not afraid," he said. "You should be." She slid a flash drive across the table. "What's this?" "Contacts. Professors. Researchers. A few friendly journalists. And one guy who owes me a favor. But you need to move fast. Because if this gets out the wrong way, She'll be gone before you even know they took her. He looked at the drive in his hand, then at Jules. Thank you. Don't thank me, she said. Just don't F*** it up. The next morning, Javier found Imani sitting on the shelter steps, watching the sunrise. Her hair was unbraided, her knees pulled to her chest. You're still here, he said. She didn't look at him. They're coming soon, she said softly. I can feel it. He sat beside her. Then we get ready. And for the first time, she looked at him like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't another person who would walk away. It happened on a Tuesday. The sky was clear for once. The wind had calmed. It almost felt like the city had given them a day off. Javier met Imani like usual. Same street, same step, same quiet exchange of a lukewarm breakfast sandwich and a coffee that never stayed hot long enough. She was sketching again, this time not on the sidewalk, but in a small, spiral notebook someone at the shelter had given her. Torn corners. The word biology still faded across the front cover, but she used it for math. Always math. Javier didn't ask what she was working on. He just watched. That was their rhythm now. He showed up. She allowed it. But that morning, she kept glancing over her shoulder. Small movements. Barely visible if you didn't know her. But Javier knew her now. Knew the difference between when she was focused and when she was listening. To the wrong kind of silence. You okay? He asked finally. She didn't answer. Then she closed the notebook slowly. Methodically. They were watching us yesterday, she said. He frowned. Who? She shrugged. Car with no plates. Parked too long. Same guy walked by twice in 20 minutes. He didn't blink right. Javier stared at her. She wasn't being dramatic. There was no fear in her voice. Just an assessment. A data point. You're sure? Not 100%, she said, but it's getting louder. He didn't ask what that meant. He had the feeling she wasn't talking about sound. So he walked her to the shelter that evening like he always did, even though technically she wasn't supposed to be there. The staff had started turning a blind eye. Imani never stayed in a bed, just curled up in the corner near the back emergency door, blanket wrapped around her like armor. She didn't ask for space. She just occupied it. Javier left early. He had a meeting with one of the professors Jules had referred him to, a cognitive pattern specialist from NYU who wanted to see more of Imani's work, wanted to evaluate her condition. Javier didn't like that word. Condition. It made her sound like a patient instead of a person. Still, it was something. A door, maybe. When he came back to the shelter 3 hours later, the lights were dimmed. Quiet. Too quiet. He asked the front desk worker, a woman named Shirley, where Imani was. She left an hour ago. Shirley said, not even looking up. Said someone from Youth Outreach picked her up. Javier froze. What? Tall guy, official badge. Said she was on the missing minors list. Javier's blood turned to ice. There's no way, he said. She's not in the system. She's not. But Shirley just shrugged. He had papers. Said it was court-ordered. Emergency placement. Legal jargon, all that. He didn't wait. Didn't argue. He ran. Through the door. Down the steps. Into the night. He called Jules. No answer. He called again. Finally, Javi? They took her, he said, breathless. What? Some fake agency. Youth Outreach. Had papers. Said she was on a list. It was a setup. Jules cursed. I'll start digging. Go to the city database. Look for any custody motions filed in the last 48 hours. If it's real, it'll be logged. If it's not, it's worse, Javier finished. He hung up and moved fast. He checked the alley, the bookstore, the stoop behind the rec center. Nothing. He finally found her chalk bag. Left behind. Torn open. That's when the panic hit him. Not loud. Not screaming. Just cold. He walked the streets until his legs hurt, until the wind turned his hands raw and numb. Calling her name even though he knew it was pointless. She was gone. The next day, Jules called back. I found something, she said. You're not going to like it. Tell me. The agency that picked her up? Not on file. But the documents match a legal motion submitted yesterday under the Department of Advanced Learning. That's not even a real thing. No, she agreed. It's a front. For who? A pause. Marcus Krell. Javier felt like he'd been punched in the chest. Marcus Krell, his former partner, the man who sold out Signum, the one who had quietly disappeared after Javier was forced out, the one who knew how to manipulate both people and policy with equal ease. He's back. Javier whispered. He never left, Jules said. He just moved underground. Quiet funding rounds. Research labs disguised as youth development programs. Imani's notebook must have hit someone's desk. How do you know it's him? Because I traced the IP address of one of the inquiry emails we got last week. It links back to a private server used by Krell Holdings. Javier sat down. He orchestrated it, he said. He waited until I built her up, until she had value. Then he took her. Jules was quiet on the other end. I'm so sorry, she said. He clenched his jaw. No, not yet. This isn't over. The next 24 hours were a blur. He hacked. He chased. He hunted. He found out where they'd taken her. A private educational research facility on the west side. Nondescript building. No signage. The kind of place you'd never notice unless you were looking for it. He went. He wasn't allowed in. Do you have an appointment, sir? She's a child, he said. We're not authorized to release information. You kidnapped her. She was transferred under emergency academic guardianship. She doesn't belong to you. She doesn't belong to anyone, the receptionist said, voice robotic. That's when Javier knew. This was more than bureaucracy. It was extraction. They didn't want to help Imani. They wanted to use her. He didn't sleep that night. He sat on the steps outside the building like a ghost, waiting for a light to flicker, for a face to appear behind the tinted windows. Nothing. He called Jules again. We have to get her out. We will, she said, but we can't do it loud. Not yet. Then how? Jules hesitated. We find someone on the inside. Someone who still has a soul. Javier looked at the building again, his hands shaking. She trusted me, he said softly. She still does, Jules replied. We just have to prove we're worth it. And with that, they made a plan. One that would put everything on the line. Because the next move would have to be illegal. But if they didn't act soon, Imani would disappear for good. Not into a foster home. Not into a system. But into a lab. Into a file. Into the hands of the man who saw her not as a child, but as a product. And Javier Cortez had already lost one dream to that man. He wasn't about to lose another. Javier stood in the corner of the parking garage, the cold from the concrete floor seeping into his boots. A light flickered overhead. The building across the street loomed like a silent threat, gray, faceless, too quiet. It was just after 3 a.m., and every part of him screamed that he should be sleeping. But he couldn't. Not when Imani was somewhere behind those walls. Jules had come through. She always did. She found someone inside, an engineer named Charlie Wu. Used to be a junior systems lead at Signum back in the early days. Quiet guy, smart, never liked Marcus. Javier remembered him vaguely from a team offsite. Charlie had given a short talk on neural node duplication, and Marcus had interrupted him halfway through just to steal the spotlight. Now Charlie owed Jules a favor. So they met here, beneath the city, like something out of a spy movie. Charlie was already pacing when Javier arrived, thin, anxious, wearing an oversized hoodie and carrying a battered laptop like it was a shield. You're insane for doing this, Charlie said the moment he saw Javier. I'm aware, Javier replied. Where is she? Charlie rubbed his eyes. Room 14A, observation wing. They say it's evaluation, but look, man, it's not what you think. They're testing her cognition under stress conditions. Sleep deprivation, neurofeedback loops. She's been under for almost 16 hours. Javier's stomach turned. She's 9, he said. Charlie nodded. I know. They didn't say anything for a moment. Then Charlie pulled out a key card and handed it over. Back in trance. North Corridor. You'll have maybe 10 minutes before someone sees the breach. If you get caught, I won't. You better not. Because once she's moved to the second-tier clearance floor, she's gone. Javier didn't ask what gone meant. He already knew. 15 minutes later, he was in. The halls were too clean, lit with that sickly white-blue glow that made everyone look like they belonged in a morgue. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was sterilized. He moved quickly, scanning the doors. Numbers, labels, no names, just codes. Then he saw it. 14A. He tapped the card. The lock blinked green. Inside, the room was sealed in glass. A transparent cube. Clinical. Imani sat inside on a stool, staring at a digital interface that stretched from floor to ceiling. Equations scrolled across the glass as her fingers traced over it, manipulating symbols like puzzle pieces. Electrodes ran from her temples to a device behind the wall, blinking in pulses. She didn't see him at first. When she finally looked up, her eyes locked onto his, and she froze. He mouthed her name through the glass. Then he moved to the side console and hit the override Charlie had mapped out for him. The electrodes disconnected. The screen shut down. The door unlatched with a soft hiss. He opened it and stepped inside. She stood slowly. "You came," she said. "Of course I did. They told me you gave me to them." Javier stopped cold. "What?" "They showed me the forms. Said you signed off. Said you exchanged my notebook for research equity." Her voice didn't crack. That made it worse. His heart dropped. "I didn't," he said. "I swear to you I didn't." "They had your name," she whispered. "I don't care what they showed you. It was forged." She stared at him for a long time. The silence felt like it lasted hours. Then she said softly, "I didn't believe them." He exhaled like his lungs were collapsing. "Come on," he said. "We're getting out of here." She nodded, stepped forward, and grabbed his hand. They made it as far as the corridor before they heard the footsteps. Sharp, confident, measured. Javier knew that walk before he even saw the face. Marcus Krell stepped into view with the calm of a man who'd already won. He was dressed in the same sleek suit Javier remembered from years ago, dark blue, tailored, surgical. His hair was a little grayer, but his eyes hadn't changed. Cold, disarming, calculating. "Javier," Marcus said, smiling like they were at a reunion. "I should have known it was you." Marcus ignored that. "Imani," he said, turning to her, "you're very special. I hope you know that." She didn't speak. "You're not meant for the streets or for simple schools. You're meant to be part of something larger, something that shapes the future." Javier stepped in front of her. "She's not yours." "You think you're saving her?" Marcus asked. "You're dragging her back into a world that doesn't want her. She belongs somewhere she can be understood." "No," Javier said. "She belongs somewhere she can choose." Marcus's smile didn't flicker. "You always were idealistic. That's why you lost. And you always mistook control for vision." They stared at each other. Two men, once partners, now on opposite sides of a line. Neither would ever cross back over. Imani's hand tightened around Javier's. She said one sentence. "I never asked to be used." And with that, they turned. They ran. The alarm started 2 seconds later. The next minutes blurred. Sirens, shouting, lights flashing red. Jules was waiting in a car outside, engine running. She popped the door before they were even within 10 feet. Javier shoved Imani into the back seat, dove in after her, and the car peeled off into the night. As the facility disappeared behind them, Javier didn't speak. He just held her hand. Imani rested her head on his shoulder. And then, in the smallest, most fragile voice he'd ever heard her use, she said one word, "Dad." And for the first time since the day he lost everything, Javier Cortez cried, not out of sadness, but because somehow in all this chaos, he had finally become something he'd never been before, a father, and he wasn't going to lose her. Not again. Not ever. They didn't go back to the shelter. Jules didn't even drive in that direction. She took them somewhere off the grid, an old converted storage garage she'd once used back in the Signum whistleblower days. The building was buried deep in the industrial district, surrounded by shipping containers and warehouses that nobody cared to monitor anymore. No cameras, no neighbors, no attention. Inside it was cold, dusty, sparse, but safe. Imani sat on a rolled-up sleeping bag in the far corner, curled up with the remains of her tattered hoodie pulled over her knees. She hadn't said a word since they fled the facility. Not one. She just stared at the cracked cement floor like it might give her an answer. Javier watched her from across the room, trying to figure out what to say. Everything felt wrong in this moment. Too quiet, too exposed. He hated that he'd had to pull her through all of that. Running, hiding, betrayal. She was a kid, and none of this should have been her burden. He crouched down beside her, careful not to spook her. "You all right?" he asked softly. She didn't respond. He tried again. "You're safe now. For real. We're not going back there." Still nothing. He sighed and sat down next to her. For a long minute, all he heard was the hum of a power strip Jules had rigged to a solar inverter. Then Imani spoke. Her voice was thin, cracked, almost not there. "They copied my notebook." Javier turned to her. "I left it behind," she whispered. "They scanned the whole thing." His chest tightened. "I'm sorry," he said. "We'll get it back. Or we'll build a better one." She shook her head. "It's not about the pages," she said. "It's about what's in them. What I know, they don't care about me. Just the pieces of me they can use." He looked at her, heartbreaking. She wasn't angry. She wasn't scared. She was resigned. "They don't see a kid," she said. "They see a machine." Javier reached out, resting his hand gently on her shoulder. "They're wrong," he said. "You're not something to be used. You're someone to be protected." Imani looked up at him, then really looked, and what he saw in her eyes wasn't gratitude. It wasn't hope. It was pain. "I didn't ask you to save me," she said. "I know," he replied. "I'm not trying to be a hero." "Then why?" "Because someone should have done it for me when I was your age," he said. "And no one did." She didn't say anything for a while. She just stared at the floor again. Finally, she whispered, "Most people who said they cared only did when it benefited them. I'm not most people." She nodded once. That was enough. Later that night, while Jules monitored the dark web for chatter and reviewed the security cams she'd hidden around perimeter, Javier and Imani sat side by side on the floor, eating cold cereal out of paper cups. Imani reached into her backpack and pulled out a small flash drive-looking device. She handed it to him. "This is a copy of the algorithms," she said. "But backwards, reversed, corrupted just enough that if they try to run it without knowing what they're doing, it'll crash their systems." He blinked. "You made a fail-safe?" She shrugged. "They don't think I'm smart enough to protect myself. That's their weakness." He held the drive carefully in his hand, like it was made of glass. "You're terrifying," he said with a small smile. She looked up at him and gave him the smallest, crooked grin. "You raised me," she said, and for the first time in days, she laughed. Just once, but it was real. Javier leaned back against the wall and closed his eyes for a second. He didn't have a plan for tomorrow. Not yet, but in that moment, he knew they had something better than a plan. They had each other, and that somehow was enough for now. They always said the system was slow, that bureaucracy moved like molasses. But Javier had worked at the top. He knew better. When the system wanted to move fast, when it was backed by the right money, the right pressure, the right names, it moved like a scalpel. On Thursday morning, they woke up to the headlines. It started with news alert on Jules' burner phone. Disgraced tech CEO behind exploitation of minor Prodigy. Exclusive report reveals stage footage, AI manipulation, and fraudulent claims. Javier sat frozen as she scrolled. The article came from a mid-tier tech blog, but the tone was confident, accusatory. The headline was followed by screenshots of Imani's chalk equations, the viral videos Javier had posted, and a heavily doctored timeline of events. They painted him as a fraud, a manipulator, Someone using a vulnerable black girl as a prop for attention, for redemption. They even included a fake screenshot of a research sale agreement, allegedly signed by Javier and a private tech group, offering exclusive licensing to Imani's mathematical intellectual property. He didn't need to ask who wrote that contract. Marcus. Of course it was Marcus. They're going for your credibility. Jules said flatly, "It's the first move, make you the story. Discredit her by discrediting you." He felt sick. "I thought we had time." "You thought they'd play fair?" Imani sat across the room, chewing dry cereal again. When Javier looked at her, she didn't blink. "They're good at this," she said. "They've done it before." He walked over and crouched in front of her. "I'll fix it," he said. She didn't answer. "I promise." Still nothing. Finally, she said, "They don't need to prove it's true. They just have to make people unsure." And she was right. That afternoon, Javier checked his old inbox. Dozens of emails, some from strangers, some from former colleagues, some from people who used to call him a genius. Most of them said the same thing. "I don't know what to believe." That was the power of a good lie, not to replace the truth, but to bury it in noise. Jules gathered every piece of media they had left, raw footage, timestamps, screenshots of metadata. They prepped a response, but it felt like shouting into a vacuum. The blog had gone viral. Bigger outlets were circling it like vultures. Sooner or later, Jules said, "They'll go after her identity." "She doesn't have one," Javier muttered. "She does now. They'll create one for her." Imani stood up. "They think they can erase me." Javier looked at her, startled. She was calm, but her hands were fists at her sides. "They think if they control the story, they control me." She turned toward them. "Let's give them something they can't erase." Jules narrowed her eyes. "What do you mean?" Imani walked to the table, grabbed a sheet of paper, and began sketching. It wasn't math this time. It was a network map, a flow of data, timed releases, cross-platform duplication. "A broadcast," she said. "Decentralized. Timed. Once it starts, it can't be stopped." Jules leaned in. "You're talking about a leak?" Imani nodded. "Not just my work. Everything. All of it. The fake contracts. The neural tests. The footage from the lab. I know where it's stored. They use a mirror data vault and forgot to lock the backup layer. It's still pinging." "You memorize their architecture?" "I watched them work." Javier looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time again. "You're not just trying to escape," he said. "You're trying to burn them down." She met his eyes. "If they get to write the story, then I never existed. But if we write it loud enough, they don't get to decide who I am." Jules looked at Javier. "She's right," she said. "But if we do this, they'll come for us. Hard." Javier didn't hesitate. "Then we make them regret it." He looked at Imani. "And this time we fight on your terms." And in that moment, something shifted in the room. They weren't hiding anymore. They were preparing for war. They launched a leak at exactly 11:58 p.m. Imani insisted on the timing. Something about quiet minutes being the loudest when you feel them right. Javier didn't argue. He just stood behind her, watching as she executed the plan she'd mapped out like it was a symphony. Jules had secured 5 mirrored VPNs, rerouted through dormant educational servers and dead university domains. Imani injected the data like code in the bloodstream, untraceable, duplicating itself with every node it hit. They didn't just leak her equations. They leaked video from inside the facility. Scans of her notebook, handwritten, time-stamped, with footage of her writing it. Confidential reports listing her as a cognitive anomaly and worse, a high potential asset. The fake contracts, the neural experiments, internal emails, even audio of Marcus saying, "We'll push it as a guardianship claim if they resist." Within minutes, the files hit Reddit, Twitter, Telegram. Then came the comments. First trickle, then flood. Javier watched it unfold on Jules' cracked laptop. Users dissected the math, stunned. Professors verified the handwriting as consistent. Researchers confirmed the neural test data matched patterns seen in savant-level processing. One post went viral in under 15 minutes. This wasn't AI. This was a child. And the system tried to erase her. But it wasn't just digital. Because less than an hour after the leak, a black SUV rolled past the warehouse twice. No plates. Then a second one. Jules checked the camera feeds. "We're not just being watched," she said. "They're narrowing in." Javier closed the laptop. Imani stood at the table, calm. "Steady. They're going to knock," she said. "No," Javier replied. "They won't knock. They'll break the door." She met his eyes. "Then we better not be here when they do." They packed everything. Hard drives, notebooks, burner phones. Javier shoved their lives into a duffel in under 4 minutes. Jules rigged a timed auto-delete on every machine they left behind. As they reached the fire exit, Imani stopped for half a second. She turned, took one last look at the room. "This time," she said, "they don't get to pretend I didn't exist." And with that, they disappeared into the shadows. Behind them, the system began to tremble, because the girl it tried to bury had just set the whole thing on fire. By morning, the world had changed. The leak spread like wildfire. Universities issued statements. Journalists scrambled. A group of professors from MIT, Stanford, and Georgia Tech publicly verified the math. Some even calling Imani's notebook the most advanced youth-authored work in theoretical modeling ever recorded. And then came the shift. Not just awe, but outrage. Because it wasn't just about a gifted kid anymore. It was about what had been done to her. Her voice, her work, her autonomy, all treated like property. A lab subject. A product. Imani didn't speak much as the news cycle exploded. She watched it quietly, eating dry toast on a floor mattress in a borrowed safe house while pundits debated her humanity on television. But when she saw Dr. Carlson, the physicist Jules had contacted, go live on national news and say, "She is not a myth. She is a mind shaped by fire, not design," something in her shifted. Javier saw it. That tiny lift in her posture. The thing they tried to take from her was back. Her presence. Even Marcus couldn't outrun the fire. As soon as the emails and recordings surfaced, investors pulled out. Research partners backed away. A former lab tech came forward and confirmed the internal experiments on Imani had been accelerated without ethical review. Under pressure, law enforcement issued a quiet order for Marcus's detainment. By week's end, his empire had cracked open. And still, Imani said nothing to the media. When a reporter tracked down Javier and asked, will she speak publicly? Maybe a TED Talk? A press conference? He just shook his head. She doesn't owe anyone that. Because truth wasn't performance. It was survival. And she had survived. They relocated to a quiet coastal town in Oregon. Jules found him a small apartment above a hardware store, where the landlord didn't ask questions as long as rent came on time. Javier fixed computers at the local school, rewired routers, installed security updates. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid just enough, and it kept his hands busy. His mind, too. Imani enrolled under a new name. No tests, no gifted label. Just one small girl with a stack of library books and a backpack full of second chances. She never told anyone what she'd done, but sometimes she still wrote equations on napkins. And sometimes, when she walked home with Javier, she'd explain a new theory she was developing. Not because she needed to understand, but because she trusted him enough to let him hear it. One night, as they sat on the rooftop watching stars blink into view, she looked over and asked, "Do you think I'll ever be normal?" Javier took a long breath before answering. "No," he said, "but I think you'll be free." She smiled at that, because that was all she ever wanted. Not a stage, not fame, just space to breathe, to learn, to exist. And when the first letter came, handwritten, from a girl in foster care who'd read the leaked notebook and said, "I thought I was broken until I saw you," Imani read it twice. Then she wrote back. She didn't sign it Prodigy. She didn't sign it Genius. She signed it with a name she chose. Not the one on any system. Not the one they tried to file away. Just one word. Imani. The girl who refused to disappear. The girl who, in the end, had rewritten her own story. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that every voice matters, even the ones the world tries to silence. New stories on the way, real, raw, and unforgettable. Be part of a community that sees what others overlook. Stay with us. The next chapter begins with you.